Hello folks, it's me, DeMontropolis, and I bring you a new series to the channel, Ninja Gaiden, released by Tecmo on the NES in 1988. If you remember my Castlevania videos, then you'll come to realize Ninja Gaiden takes a lot of inspiration from Castlevania with certain aspects of its gameplay. However, the developers of Tecmo wanted to lean heavily on the ninja theme, since it was gaining popularity in the US. Not just that, but it was developed in parallel with an arcade game of the same name, but the only thing they share in common is that they're built around the ninja theme. With the NES game, you can see it in the more fast-paced gameplay, the strong emphasis on cinematic cutscenes, a first for the NES, and the difficulty level that parallels the patience of a true ninja. This last bit is arguably the biggest factor in the game's popularity, as the developer's philosophy was that players would discard the game if it wasn't hard enough. As of this video's upload, I have only played this first game in the series, but without further ado, let's jump in and immerse into the world of Ninja Gaiden. Right away, Ninja Gaiden distinguishes itself from Castlevania thanks to very solid, tight, and swift control. Our ninja, Ryu Hayabusa, runs and stops on a dime without any startup or momentum, perfectly precise, and this also translates to his jumping. He has only one jump height, and trying to pull back in midair is much slower, so he can't zigzag like a Mega Man. Regardless, the controls are so well woven into the gameplay loop that as your skills improve, so does the momentum of progression through the game. As less obstacles get in your way, you'll be ripping through stages thanks to how near immaculate and snappy the controls are. This translates into the focus on fast-paced melee action, always keeping you on the move in an effort to slice through the levels as quickly as possible. Even the timer helps out with this, because every stage has a timer of 150 seconds, 2.5 minutes. Once your skills as a ninja improve significantly, most stages can be blitzed through in just under a minute. There's also a mechanic where you can cling to walls and jump between two adjacent walls to advance upwards, which is always fun to do because of how snappy it is and the sound effects that come with it. However, you can only climb up and down walls if they have ladders. If I had a major critique for the controls, it's with this wall clinging. Since you can only climb up and down ladder walls, this can potentially restrict your movement and set you up for a beating. In Act 5-3, it's easy to get knocked onto the background walls by the boxers, and since you are unable to climb up quickly, you'll get pummeled until you manage to squirm out of there. Fitting the melee gameplay, Ryu's primary weapon of choice is the Dragon Sword passed down from his family ancestors. While lacking in range, it has a very quick startup, air slash especially being instantaneous, and it's strong enough to kill almost every enemy in one hit, except for those white Kratos looking dudes. This sword isn't just fast, it also has a big hitbox that makes it fun to hack through enemies at breakneck speed. You can even poke this one guy while standing on a very separate platform. Though for some reason the sword hitbox shrinks while trying to pop open the item containers across each level, but it's very small of an issue that it isn't worth making a con about. Just get closer. In addition to his sword, Ryu can pick up different sub-weapons from lamps and lanterns. On a side note, I like the detail of these lanterns having different aesthetics throughout most of the levels. But anyway, Ryu can use Ninpo, or spiritual energy, to power 5 different sub-weapons, and the level design allows all of them to get a chance at the spotlight. The shuriken serves to be cost efficient. The windmill star can be jumped over to keep it in play and slice everything around Ryu. The R to the fire wheel is good at covering enemies above Ryu without requiring a jump. And the invincible fire wheel lets Ryu channel his anger to incinerate everything he touches, though this is only at the cost of Ryu's current sub-weapon. All 4 of these are very powerful in the right hands, but if used too often at once, Ryu will run out of Ninpo. However, there is one more sub-weapon that takes this mentality to the extreme in the best way possible. Meet the Spin Slash. This simply lets Ryu spin in the air with every aerial sword attack, but lo and behold, the level design is what perfects the fun in using it. As almost all enemies die in one hit, the Spin Slash can cleave through many enemies at once, and it's always satisfying to string up a combo that kills multiple enemies in one jump. Ryu is also protected from projectiles, so some of the nastier enemies, either above or below, or even ones camping with projectiles, will be slaughtered with ease. Another potent aspect of Spin Slash is it can kill most bosses in 1 or 2 hits, making for flashy finishers and allowing players to bypass the tedium that is defeating some of them legitimately. With all of these tremendous strengths, Spin Slash will eat through Ninpo like crazy, as every jump attack will use up a Ninpo and jump slashes are going to be very commonly used across the game. Despite this, there is a technique that can serve as a workaround for the Spin Slash problem. By pressing down an attack in the air, Ryu will just do a regular attack, and this can be used to conserve Ninpo until it's necessary for use. This and other special techniques help push your skill level by mastering their use as a commonality. These include slash canceling, which allows Ryu to dish out damage to some of the last bosses at a much quicker rate, but isn't always guaranteed to work as some of the button timings are precise. There is also a technique that allows Ryu to actually climb regular walls without a ladder. By simply snapping back to the wall after jumping, Ryu will gain height. It's pretty silly, but there are only a couple boss fights where this way of wall climbing can be put to use, and sometimes you might get in a predicament where it can save your life. The only problem with the sub-weapons is that you have to only press up on the D-pad to use them, no other direction in addition. This means if, say, you hold up and right together, Ryu will just use his sword, and it sucks because Ryu does have to stop moving for a bit if he wants to use something. Ninja Gaiden's levels have no gimmicks to interact with, so the levels are solely carried by the enemy variety, and it's very diverse. You have your basic slow enemies who may lunge or throw something, but you also have very fast enemies who can come at you from behind or forward. Stationary turrets and nimble hoppers, flying bats and birds, jumping ninjas. There are many enemy types and combinations you'll have to deal with in increasingly treacherous situations. It also helps that Ryu is swift in killing them, so no enemy placement overstays its welcome. Once you know how to deal with a specific foe, they won't be sticking around for long. It also helps that the visual variety itself is pretty bizarre in a funny way. Machine gunners and football players, karate kickers and demon cannons, demon dogs and leopards, hunchbacks and gargoyles. My favorite enemy is the jetpack ninjas for how wacky the concept is, and they're pretty funny to kill in both instances that they appear. One of the most notorious enemies are the bloodthirsty birds, thanks to their wickedly high top speed catching up with Ryu and knocking him into those pits. I don't take any problem with how their movement is designed, as usually you can trick them into flying off screen or wait for them to come to you. My issue is that they deal 3 damage. They hit harder than actual bullets and sharp weapons that can easily kill a regular human, and that damage can stack thanks to Ryu's short iframes. Of all the things to train against, bird talons was probably something Ryu didn't account for, which is pretty funny given how common birds are starting with Act 3. But still, the birds are not the most obnoxious enemy in the game, the lobber enemies are. These guys come in many different sprites, and their pattern is lobbing a projectile in a random trajectory. However, their timings are also random. Although this can usually be bypassed with sub-weapons like the Spin Slash or Shuriken, sometimes you'll have to brave them with only the sword. Usually they're an easy kill, but the randomness of their attacks can potentially dish out an unexpected and unavoidable death. Even with the Spin Slash handy, you can still die to this BS. There is one problem with the enemies overall. Their respawning is nigh immediate. The way the game dictates when an enemy will spawn is if Ryu collides with the trigger spot from the right or left side, and if he stays there, the enemy will come back as soon as it is killed or despawned from play. In most cases, it can catch players off guard because of how fast the enemy comes back to life. This also means that most of the time you won't be able to kill a flying enemy while standing, then jump forward right after, because it will come back right away and hit you mid-air. One big stinker of Ninja Gaiden is how the difficulty leans towards a very extreme style of trial and error, which ruins its accessibility to some of the lesser skilled players who expect nothing but fairness. Later levels have setups that demand increasingly restrictive ways to get past them, and while it is possible to beat the whole game with just the sword, simply getting to that point takes an incredible amount of patience and dedication. There are a lot of times where the game is not going to be fair to a blind player and will kick them down relentlessly. Only the rough and tough elitists will have the strength to get back up. By contrast, the first few acts are a blast to play for newcomers. Act 1 teaches the basic mechanics of the game without any instant death pits around, and only has 1 level before the boss. It's also ironically the only level where I died to a timeout because I didn't realize it was that short. So if you do die, you'll come to recognize the pace of the game. Act 2 ups the layout slightly, but is still relatively tame. And same with Act 3, but this time more dangerous enemies like birds are being introduced. The difficulty progression across these acts is pretty natural, and it's only until Act 4 where the setups start demanding more specific maneuvers. Regardless of where you are in the game, all of the levels have an incredibly good flow to them. This is all in part thanks to Ryu's fast movement speed, the frailty of the enemies in his path, and the well-rounded length of the levels. There isn't much out there that can compare to the pace of action here, and once you get in the groove, nothing can stop you. This lends itself to a high replay value. Even if you keep dying to a level, the enemy placements are dead set on forcing you to improve your skills until the right path becomes second nature, and once you reach that point, you'll never forget it. It also helps that the game provides unlimited continues, so deaths and game overs only prove to be a minor setback. With the exception of one case, the checkpoints will respawn you at the start of a level's room, and that helps to pick up right after a death to try again. Dying also cuts your Ninpo in half, a better alternative than just removing all of it. And when you do manage to beat a level, it really does feel satisfying, because you put so much work into braving those challenges, and it'll generate an insanely high replay value. Once you come back to these levels after taking a break, the challenges that once gave you a tough time are now the ones being kicked down, and if you have enough strong willpower, you can beat the game in 20 minutes or less. Although the stages are only made up of enemies reoccurring across the game, the graphics give each stage a visual identity that's immediately recognizable, and most locations are themed around places a ninja would explore: the city alleyway, outposts, natural environments, and the Temple of Darkness. Since the locations are also tied to the story, it helps to answer the question of why Ryu is in this place or that place. The details of the Temple of Darkness is exceptional. You can see the outer wall and the place of red execution from this shot here, which is where Act 5-3 takes place, and even that diagonal slant in its structure is incorporated in the background of that level. One of the game's biggest problems are the first 5 bosses. Most of them are painfully easy and or have very limited and unpolished patterns. The Barbarian's attack actually passes through Ryu without hurting him, and Bomberhead's sickle doesn't clip Ryu's head when he's ducking, but both of these bosses are actually copy-paste of the same basic pattern. Massacre can only jump along each corner, but despite mixing up his attack timings, he's too predictable, and the Kelberos dogs struggle to reliably hurt Ryu if he hides underneath one of the platforms. Bloody Mouth is probably the worst offender. If he uses his lightning attack while further back, it requires a frame-perfect jump to dodge, so slashing him mindlessly while tanking the attacks will score a win 100% of the time. Thankfully, the spin/slash one-shotting these bosses gives the player a way to skip the tedium of having to fight them legitimately every time. Interestingly, Massacre is the only one who can't be hurt by spin/slash, as Act 3 does not provide it, but he can still be easily beaten with the fire wheel. If you do happen to die to one of these bosses, you get sent back to the start of the stage you're on, and depending on the stage, this can be pretty painful if you still aren't familiar with it. I imagine this was done to give Ryu a chance to come back with one of the sub-weapons, but still. This is taken to the extreme with a punishment like no other, one I like to call the Jakio curse. Dying to any of the final bosses doesn't send you to the start of 6-3, it resets you all the way back to 6-1. And let me tell you, Act 6's challenges are not easy to learn and overcome in one setting, so being tasked to do it all again for messing up against the boss, who you probably weren't able to learn correctly on the first try, is a huge turnoff. That being said, the final boss gauntlet on its own is exhilarating. There are 3 bosses back to back, and each of them tests something different out of you. The Masked Devil is a very slow fight with Ryu having to avoid the wall that is his father, and the fireballs that protect him. Here's where the wall climbing technique is tested if you want to avoid damage, but this is also the last boss who normally can be one-shot with the spin/slash, as moving on to the next boss will take Ryu's sub-weapon away. The Devil Doer himself, Jakio, has a very simple pattern of flying back and forth, and his attacks are slow and weak, but can home in on Ryu quite easily. The fight is a test of endurance, as Ryu has to find opportunities to attack a Jakio. Being too aggressive and greedy will make it easy to get hurt, and I'd say this is my favorite boss because the methods of defeating him come from naturally learning how to fight him. Like, I always stick to using the middle platform for leverage, but jumping off the walls for an attack is just as viable. The final boss, Jashin, is an all-out assault. It has a lot of defenses with the head and tail that must be cut down, helped with the slash canceling technique, and the many fireballs do a lot of damage. I like the adrenaline here, because you have to balance dodging the fireballs and disabling the defenses. If you take too long, that's more time for you to get hurt, but once the heart is open, you're free to go crazy. It's also cool that you can stand on the boss's spine after beating it, asserting your dominance over Ninja Gaiden. One of Ninja Gaiden's big strengths is the sound design. It's top-notch stuff that come together to create satisfying blips and crunches. Slashing enemies apart is quick and clean, and doing wall jumps is fun thanks to those clicky and snappy sounds. The item sounds are pretty diverse too. There's a sound for picking up items, a sound for picking up health, which is also shared with destroying containers with a sub-weapon, and a sound for 1-ups, which is kind of funny to me because there's only 3 1-ups in the entire game, but you can technically get an infinite number, as the third one can be respawned over and over, even after dying to a timeout. On the musical side, we have a really good soundtrack across the stages. There's very catchy tunes focusing on quick melodies, and while they repeat melodies often, I don't mind because they're well composed to the NES's limitations. And while some of them are repeated for use in future acts, or even taken from cutscenes, they still fit very well with the setting and theme of every level. It's easy to say 4-2's song is the best, and while I can kind of agree with that, you should not sleep on the others. Fun fact, this has nothing to do with the NES version of Ninja Gaiden, but the PC Engine port of this game has a unique soundtrack of its own. While not as memorable as the NES soundtrack in my opinion, the reinterpretations are still good on their own merit and worth checking out. Moving away from gameplay, Ninja Gaiden brings forth something truly excellent in its cutscenes, which has marked a big first for console gaming and really helped the game stand out in the pack. There's a lot to praise here. The art style is inspired by anime with mostly still images and text on the bottom, and characters even move their lips to match what they're saying. There's iconic moments like the 2 ninjas dueling in the beginning, or the shot of the Temple of Darkness from afar, but there's also small details to appreciate, like the Jakio's mouth animation actually changing if he's either talking or laughing. The OST for these cutscenes is just as memorable as the stage songs, capturing the mood and emotions of each scene down to a T. There's quieter moments for the aftermath of a boss battle, somber melodies when someone's on their deathbed, devilish motifs when the Jakio makes his presence known, and then there's straight up bangers like Foster's theme. That's surprisingly one of my favorite songs in the game. It also helps that the cutscenes have surprisingly very little translation errors. It's clear that Tecmo made a big effort when translating the game to make sure the English was easy and quick to understand. The errors that do exist are very minor and only amount to a few sentences and words coming off as improper with its delivery, but still understandable. When looking at the story itself nowadays, it's pretty simple all things considered. Despite that, it is detailed in a much larger scope compared to nearly any other story of its cousin NES competitors, starting off with a revenge-motivated character who gets wrapped up in a convoluted scheme with the entire world at stake. The great part of the game's difficulty is that you really have to work if you want to progress through the story. It's no cakewalk, and with most cutscenes ending in plot twists and cliffhangers, it acts as an extra source of motivation to drive you forward, leaving you on the edge of your seat to see what unfolds next in Ryu's fate. But we can't talk about the story without touching on our boy Ryu Hayabusa here. Illustrated as a dedicated and honorable ninja, he has a good number of emotive expressions to boot, especially with that angry close-up, but he is prone to letting his anger cloud his judgment of others. Over the course of the story, though, he does put his petty feelings aside to focus on doing the right thing. It's also funny that, for a ninja, he gets ambushed quite a lot. The characters he interacts with help shed light on the greater plot and serve a good purpose in pushing the narrative. Irene Liu may have mysterious motives when tranking Ryu at the start, but that first impression instilled him to value her life over the world-threatening statue he held. And her sparing his life in return allowed both of them to start over with a fresh beginning, finally at peace together. Also, your codename is Sea Swallow? Real subtle, you whore. Walter Smith and Foster are mostly back-to-back exposition dumps, but there is a difference with Ryu's interactions. Smith is friendly enough that Ryu can let his guard down and care for his well-being, but Foster's coercions make sense of Ryu accusing him of murder and are purely meant to catch him up to speed, along with the shady feeling that there's something he's not telling you. And of course, the creepy villain that is Jakio. The mastermind of it all, he does a good job at taunting Ryu and pushing him to his limit with the difficult situations he throws at our fellow ninja. He's got quite the scary close-up too. and once he has nothing else to throw other than the boss fight, Ryu's anger hypes you up for the showdown, and it feels great to cut him to pieces. If there's one plot hole that bothers me, it's this question. If Ryu's father Ken had one of the demon statues on his person, how did Irene get her hands on it? See, according to Smith, he and Ken each kept one of the statues so they remained separated forever, with Smith staying in North America and Ken in Japan. This means in the span of one day, somehow Irene was able to travel to Japan to obtain it, then come back to America for her first interactions with Ryu. This doesn't explain how she got it though. Did she sneak into Ryu's house without alerting him to get it? Did she pull it off Ken's fallen body, despite him having gone missing after the duel? I guess we'll never know. So in the end, I have 23 pros and 10 cons. A big factor in your enjoyment of the game will be in how you tolerate this kind of oppressive difficulty, as Ninja Gaiden stacks so many things against you, and there's many challenges that are guaranteed to kill you the first time until you learn how to get past them. But once you do, that is where Ninja Gaiden truly shines. Ryu's speed in cutting through a level is fully unique from the likes of Mega Man and Castlevania, and he has the perfect arsenal in dealing with this wacky set of enemies. So with all this in mind, I'm going to give Ninja Gaiden a very strong rating of 8 out of 10. Great! And that's the end of this review. If you like what you saw, consider giving a like and subscribe to my channel. As per usual, I have my Discord server DeMontropolis in the description, so consider joining if you like my content. I also want to give a shout out to my friend Mini Macro Sound. 3 years ago, he developed a fan-made reinterpretation of this game, with overhauled mechanics, level design, bosses, and remastering both the NES and PC Engine soundtracks. So if you're looking for a more accessible way to experience this game, I got a link below in the description. And with that said, I'll be signing off. Take care, folks.